マイクのテスト中、マイクのテスト中。マイクのテスト中、マイクのテスト中。音声聞こえてますでしょうか？背景にある、Diablo IV の、公式配信の、音声、音楽ですね。並びに私の声と、聞こえてますでしょうか？もし、音声バランス、あまりよろしくない、例えばその背景の音が大きすぎるとか、私の声の方が大きすぎるとかいうようなことがあれば、もしくは小さすぎるというようなことがあれば、ぜひ、お気軽におっしゃってください。ナイヤさん、おはようございます。音声大丈夫です。とのことでありがとうございます。いつもながらとっても助かります。公式の、裏でバックグラウンドで流れてる音楽の方もちゃんと聞こえますか？ちょっと前回の配信、公式配信を視聴する動画の方では、どうも聞こえてなかったっぽいんですけれども、そのあたりちょっと修正してみました。今だと、再修正が効くので、なんとなく BGM が聞こえていれば OK なんですが、ちょっと音声上げてみるかな。少し音声のボリューム上げてみました。放送の音声が遅れて流れてますとのことですね。そして放送の音声別に公式配信の別ウィンドウで流してたりしますかね。それだと若干遅れると思います。多少の遅延があるので、はい。多分リアルタイムでは、今、何秒遅延あるのかな？だいたい3秒から4秒、4秒弱ですかね。4秒弱の遅延があると思います。あれ？私の声が二重になっている感じですか？私の声が二重になっている感じですか？ありゃー、ちょっと待ってください。今度どうでしょう。これだとひょっとして私の声は二重にならないけど、公式の音声が聞こえないとかでしょうか？ ちょっと待ってくださいね。これはちょっと早めに始めといて正解でしたね。はい。はい。今、公式が一瞬流れたかと思います。ただ、多分、それだと私の声も、また反響してしまうと思うので、ちょっと待ってくださいね。ただ、この方法だともしかしたらボリューム調整が効かない可能性はありますね。どれだろう。これかなこれかなこれかなはい。今度どうでしょう。公式配信の音声と私の声と、公式配信の音声と私の声と、あれなんか残響してそうな雰囲気だな。あれなんか残響してそうな雰囲気だな。反響してますか？うわー、どうしよう。どうしよう。反響してますか？うわー、どうしよう。どうしよう。ちょっと待ってくださいね。モニターオフになってる。モニターオフになってる。フィルター。フィルター。あら、公式配信の方、デモ画面に、デモ画面じゃない。公式配信の方、デモ画面に、これは昨日公開されたやつですね。
Unholy vampiric powers to wield, and new endgame encounters to test your skills.
And players will need to harness the enemy's own blood magic against them to end this new evil before it's too late. Diablo IV, the Season of Blood.
In Season 2, the people of Sanctuary have a new danger to face. Invasion by an army of vampires. This shadowy vampire cult has laid
私の
claim
音
to large areas
声
of the
と
world
その公式配信の音声との大きさバランス、私の声がやや大きくしてあると思うんですけれども、どうでしょうか。ちゃんと聞こえますでしょうか、両方とも。
Before there were humans in Sanctuary, it was inhabited by the firstborn children of Inarius.
やっぱり反響してますか。
But because of Inarius' actions, ancients had their powers drawn away from them. But some among them were not strictly subject to a true death.
ありがとうございます。ちょっとこれで試してみて、またおかしかったら言ってください。ちょっとこれで試してみて、またおかしかったら言ってください。
During the events of Season 2, the player is going to contract a vampiric curse, but they're not under Lord Zir's control, which gives them a unique opportunity to strike back against the cult and stop Lord Zir's plans.
We'll encounter a variety of new characters this season, including a band of vampire hunters, one with a particularly shadowy past.
Seek out Zir's army. Kill as many as you can.
Eris is a professional vampire hunter. She's crossed and recrossed
ナエ
the
さん
wild
若干
sanctuary, putting
反
an end
響
to
し
the
てますが、
undead
公式音声で消せてる
before.
感じと。
Eris is played by actor Gemma Chan. It's exciting to see more film and television actors lending their talents to the video game world. Gemma brings a wealth of experience to the table from
ちょ
a
っと
wide
これで
variety
思
of
考してみ
roles.
ま
It
す。
was a
は
great
い。
choice to breathe life into this character of a
ちょっとこれ
world-weary
で
but
思考してみ
determined
ます。
vampire
はい
hunter with a lot of emotional complexity.
That's a bite mark.
You're changing, aren't you? No, from the depth of that wound, you should have already. She is strong. She's compassionate towards others, but she's also witnessed a lot of horror in her life. So she's pretty emotionally guarded and stubborn and fixed in her worldview. Oh, you're going to change. I'm sorry, but whatever's preventing your cravings won't last forever. It never does.
She realizes that the player character has these vampire traits, which makes him a useful tool, but potentially a disposable one.
This is madness. Perhaps that's what it takes.
One of the core seasonal mechanics for this season are vampiric powers. Vampiric powers can be acquired by defeating Bloodseekers and minions of Lord Zir in order to acquire potent blood, which allows you to unlock or upgrade vampiric powers.
When you collect all of these various powers, they have costs, which are going to be detailed as part of the pack system. So armor pieces that you collect during the course of the season are going to have these packs associated with them.
There are 3 types of packs, and you can use the boons they provide in order to fuel the blood seals for various vampiric powers. You can combine the power of different blood seals in the Sanguine Circle, so long as you have the appropriate combination of packs in order to power them.
One thing we've really tried hard to do is to
ヴ
revive
ァ
powers
ン
that enhance every
ピリ
build
ッ
so that
ク
there's
パ
no
ワー
one
っていうのが
way to play
吸
or
血
pursue
力
vampire
と呼ばれ
vampires.
る
There's
も
one
の
that
で
the
した。
player like
で
where
ね
the。player dashes, they shoot
はい
a cloud of bats. They'll curse creatures they pass through along the way. As you kill those creatures, you're going to actually steal their souls. When you use certain abilities on your character, all of those souls are unleashed, dealing devastating damage to nearby creatures.
There's also an ability called Rising Moon, where you can stack basic skills, and after you reach a maximum number of stacks, you go into a vampiric blood rage. If you can't get enough of bats, there's even a vampire power that allows you to summon a bat companion. He'll take a bite out of your enemies and have a chance to stun them.
ヴァンピリックレイジ。
Lord Zir's army is
Aye.
pushing across Sanctuary in an event called the Blood Harvest, which will always be active somewhere on the map, but will change locations in a cyclical way.
Blood harvests are large-scale open-world events where vampires have overwhelmed an area in the hopes of enslaving the populace, harvesting their blood, and siring more vampires.
Players will venture into these areas to rescue prisoners, stop sinister rituals, and hunt for high-value enemies. Of course, they'll be rewarded for their efforts with a variety of new items, as well as the potent blood that fuels their vampiric powers.
In Season 2, the Season of Blood, we're going to be adding 5 new returning endgame bosses for players to engage with once they get into World Tiers 3 and 4. Players will be able to earn the materials to summon these bosses by completing Whispers and by completing Helltide events.
We have some new enemies with powerful elemental attacks, giving players more reason to seek out and equip gear that enhances their resistances.
What sets these new endgame bosses apart is that they offer a new way to farm uniques. So if there's a build-defining unique you're after, you'll be able to target farm specific bosses.
And our most challenging boss that we're going to be adding as part of Season 2 is also going to have an opportunity to drop extremely rare unique items that players have been hunting for. We're also going to be adding some quality of life updates in Season 2. The First of which is we're gonna be taking our gems
うん、やっぱりそうですね。昨日公開された動画ですね、これ。昨日かな、もっと前だったかな。
As long as you finish the prologue, you can now choose to skip the rest of the campaign and dive straight into creating a seasonal character. If you previously unlocked a mount in Diablo IV, it will be immediately available to use when you begin your journey through the Season of Blood. And we've made it so that renown rewards persist through seasons, so that the reward is now account bound.
As we do with every new season, we'll be adding a new season journey and a new battle pass filled with new, like vampiric-themed cosmetics for them to collect. And we'll also be adding some new town portal cosmetics, both in the free and paid versions of our battle pass in season 2. We'll also be making a number of other changes to the game, updating unique powers and items, reviewing legendary aspects for different classes. We're going to be updating stats like our resistance values across the game, and a number of other balance tweaks to make sure the game is as fun as possible for players.
One of the most exciting things for me about working on seasons.
トモハイドさん、通りすがりの初見です。拝見させていただきます。とのこと、ご視聴ありがとうございます。ゆっくりしていってください。ご視聴ありがとうございます。ゆっくりしていってください。コメントの方、チャット欄の方、気軽にコメントしていただければ嬉しいです。
We'll continue to improve upon established systems by listening to player feedback to make your adventure in Sanctuary the best it can be.
We're incredibly excited for you to explore more corners of Sanctuary. So come join us in the hunt. Explore more corners of Sanctuary. So come join us in the hunt. Explore more corners of Sanctuary. So come join us in the hunt.
また珍しい顔ぶれですね。
Diablo IV Campfire Chat. I am Adam Fletcher. I'm the community lead here for the Diablo franchise, and I'm joined by two people here. One of them familiar face, one of them a new face.
Yeah.
Feel free to introduce yourself, guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Charles Dunn. I'm an associate game designer working on the live balance team.
And hey everybody, I'm Adam Jackson. I'm the
アダ
lead
ム・
class
ジャ
designer
クソ
for
ン
Diablo IV.
は、
And
以
as you guys
前
know, like last week, we talked a lot about season 2. We actually revealed kind of like all the details about season 2. We went into a bunch of different updates that are going to be coming in season 2, and then
キャン
this
プファイアチャットでは
stream
新
was
顔の
specifically
は
for
人で
class
すね。
updates, talking about resistances, talking about updates to damage buckets, and more. We actually have a lot to talk about. Hopefully you guys
そう
like
相
numbers
当い
because
ろ
I've
い
got
ろ
some
あるそう
designers.
です。
Hopefully you guys like
レジストの
to hear
話、
about all these
対戦の
changes
話
that
と
we're gonna be going through.
で、
But
あ
at the
と
same time, we're also going to be talking about some future updates that are coming for the game as well. We will talk about the first update that's going to be hitting
ダメージ
after
バケツの話と、
which is patch
だけれども
121.
結
So
構
we'll be
な
hitting on
内容
that
量
at
に
the
ボリューム
end
になる
of
み
the
たいな話ですね。
But before we kind of like jump into 121, I know that you guys have a lot to talk about regarding classes, resistances, damage buckets, unique items. Take it away,
ナイ
Adam.
ヤさん、フル株本
Yeah,
当に
totally. So
いないんだ
yeah,
ろ
we can
う
start
な。
jumping to slides. So the class team and really the
まあ
whole Diablo
基
IV team has been
本若い
very
人が多い
busy
ですよ
with
ね。
improving the game. So
あの
our
パイ
strategy
キオ
for
ラ
the season of
以外
Bloods
は
is kind of a 5-point strategy. The high level goal here was we were focusing on addressing player feedback and really making systemic improvements to the game. We wanted to improve the whole foundation of the game from the ground up as much as we could. So our strategy for the Season of Blood. Firstly, we wanted to update elemental resistances. We've heard
はい、
feedback that they weren't quite hitting the mark that we wanted to.
属性
So we're
耐
making some
性
changes there.
のアップデー
We're also
ト、
looking to make uniques more exciting and impactful.
ユニークアイテムがもうちょっともっとインパクトがあるようなものに変えるということ。
We're also updating damage buckets and the underlying math of how the game works to make it a little more even, have better parity between builds and classes. And then the final one is really making all of these changes a bonus and making it feel like this is a large improvement to the game from the ground up. So I think we'll take it away with Charles first to talk about elemental resistances.
Yeah, let's talk about resistances. So
はい、
currently
まず
in the Season of the Malignant
属
on
性
live
耐
right
性で
now,
すね。
resistances are calculated in a way called inverse multiplicative. So what this means is that if you have, say, 20% poison resistance, and then you grab another piece of gear that has 20% more, your character stat sheet
す
will
で
actually show
に
you have 36% poison
20% の
resistance. And that's because
毒
there's a diminishing return
毒物耐
on the
性
more
があっ
resistance you
て、
get.
さらにそこに 20% が加わる場合は加算ではなくて乗算になると、つまり 36% になると。
And this means that you can stack resistances essentially infinitely. There's no hard cap. You know, you could get resistance on every piece
つま
of gear,
り
and it would contribute to reducing
100%
that
に
damage
は
you're taking. Additionally, right now, armor contributes both
というか
to
その
elemental damage
上限がない
reduction.
と
It kind of gets
いうこと
factored
で
into
す
this
ね。
calculation, and it also reduces the physical damage you would
加
take
算だと 100% を超えるような場合でも乗算にしてしまうので、
Going forward into the season of blood,
100% を超えても
resistances are going to change how they're calculated, and they're now going to be
もっと増えていくと。
So that means if you have the 20% poison resistance and you get
あ、
another
おっ
piece
さん
that
さん
has 20% more,
こんばんは、お邪魔しますとのことで、ゆっくりしていってください。いらっしゃいませ。
although since this adds up additively now, we do need to add a cap. So the resistances are going to be capped at a baseline of 70%. Your character can
それとは別に 100% 以上にはならない、ならないとは言っても、それとは別に、いわゆる 70% キャップを設けると。で、上限突破した場合でも 85% が、属性耐性の、上限になると。これは一般的なアクション RPG のやり方を踏襲した感じですね。
Two separate elemental resistance. They could have, say, fire resistance plus cold resistance. Now they'll have all resistance along with one random one, such as fire.
で、防御力、防御力というステータスに関しては、物理耐性、物理属性に対する耐性のみを持つことになると。耐性のみを持つことになると。
Let's talk a little bit about the overall impact that you're going to see as a player. First and most importantly, resistances
ナ
are
ヤ
going
さん
to matter a
100超え
lot
ちゃうと
more
壊
in
れるから
season
な。
blood.
そうなんですけれども、いわゆるパーセンテージというよりあれですね、数値、数値として扱いつつ、キャップを、上限を、天井を新たに設けたと。70、デフォルトで70。で、上限突破した状態でも、85%、最大 85% ということですね。で、物理レジストの上限ってどうなってるんだろう、これ。物理耐性。例えば、ディアブロ2なんかだと、物理レジストに関しては、もうさらにキャップが低くて 50% になってたりとかするんですけれども、ちょっと気になるところですね。私が聞き逃しただけかもしれませんけど。
So the first one is that we want the system to have an endpoint. Players should be able to hit that 70% cap at roughly level 80 for most resistances. This isn't going to be something that you're chasing up to level 100 and you need absolute best
だい
possible
た
gear
い
in
レ
order
ベ
to
ル
hit this cap. It's going to be something that's
80 近
very
辺
achievable
で、
for most players as they're getting to the late game.
属性レジスト70に達することができるように、できるようになるんじゃないかと。
That's why we're adding the all resist to rings and amulets. This is a failsafe to ensure that players will always have some baseline minimum amount of resistance, so they're not getting completely destroyed by elemental damage. They're not really optimized.
指輪とかアミュレットについてる全レジなどなどがあるため、そんな極端に属性レジ、属性耐性が下がりすぎることはおそらくないだろうと。で、パラゴンを使ったり、装備を使ったり、エリクサーを使ったりすることで、上限、属性レジの上限を上げることができると。属性レジの上限を上げることができると。
Poison resistance increased by 6%, and that's really impactful. especially
特に
because the
エリクサ
that's really impactful. The resistance that you get, kind of in excess of 70%, is disproportionately valuable. Just to give you an example, let's say you're going from 0% resistance up to 5% resistance. What that means is, well, you're taking 5% less damage. You would have taken 100 damage, now you take 95.
はい
But if you're already at, say, 70% resistance at the cap,
はい
and you go up to 76% resistance, what that means is if you were to take 100 poison damage, well, at 70%, you would have taken actually 30. But now, at 76, you're only taking 24 because you have 76% resistance. And that's actually a 20% damage reduction. You're gaining a lot more effective life whenever you add that extra cap at the end. So really, getting to that cap and pushing above the cap is a great way
例え
to
ば
give you a better fighting chance against some of these late game bosses who are
70%
have these elemental effects.
こうの、上限の
These elixirs
あ
are
の
really
で
a key part of your arsenal.
レジスト耐性を持っていると、ダメージが30になるケースの場合だと、レジストが76% まで上がると、ダメージが24に減ると。で、これが、実に、20%かな、はい、の、70、レジスト70、キャップの時と比べて、20% の、ダメージ耐性、の、ダメージ低減効果の上昇になると、はい、いうような話ですね。はい。で、ユニークの話です。ユニークは現状あまり十分なそのエキサイティングな狩りの対象になってない。狩りの対象になってない。
don't want that situation to happen, whether it's because the unique effect isn't good enough or the stats on the gear aren't good enough. We want to make sure these are exciting and awesome and attractive to get. So we did a giant pass, and we updated nearly every single unique in the game. Not all
ほぼすべて、おおむねすべてのそのユニークに対して大きなバフをかけたという話ですね。
So the first one, and by the way, we're also not just doing this in Season of Blood, but this is kind of how we're going to be looking at making uniques unique going forward. So the first one is adding new stats to them. So as an example here, increased tornado duration isn't really a stat that exists in the game that can be on gear, but it could potentially exist on a unique. The next one is giving larger existing stat ranges. So as an example here, bonus fire damage would normally roll between, let's say, 15 and 25%. I just made these numbers.
ナイヤさん、ハツラじゃないとか言われちゃったから。ナイヤさん、ハツラじゃないとか言われちゃったから。
The next one is overriding slot rules. So the example here, weapons normally can't roll cooldown reduction, which is a really powerful stat on an item, but on a unique it potentially could. And then the last one is updating unique effects. This is really like actually updating the special thing that the unique does that adds to your player power. So the example here, a unique can normally require hitting enemies from behind on Tuesdays, but now it'll just work when you hit enemies, right? We just make it easier and more consistent. But now it'll just work when you hit enemies, right? We just make it easier and more consistent. Me too. It's just a good day. Yeah. All right, so now let's go through some actual changes. So the first one is Fists of Fate. This is our favorite random item where everything's just lucky hit.
ランダムでダメージが上がり下がりするやつですね。
And this one doesn't really give you that direct
Kote.
damage power. We're taking one of the lucky hit effects and changing it to a new stat that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game. That's basically a chance to give you a damage buff for a certain amount of time. So now this will make up for some of that, not giving you your, skill rank stats or other things, but now it gives you some damage. Next one, we've got the Grasp of Shadow. This is a rogue unique that's themed around summoning shadow clones to do damage. You can see on the left, that's the old version. The shadow clone damage range was between, 14 to 21%, and now it can roll between 31 and 50%, so it's much higher.
左側、シャドウクローンダメージが古い方で、右側が 新しい方ですね。
Again, increasing the stat ranges, the damage to burning enemies goes from 14 to was it 28%, and now it's going to 42 to 70%. So a lot more damage to burning enemies. And then the next one is actually overriding the slot rule and adding a new stat that can't normally be on weapons, which is ranks to upheaval. And when we start going later in the presentation, you're going to learn that skill ranks are really, really powerful in the Season of Blood and going forward. So this is going to make this item much
ま
more
あ、基本左から右に変わるということですね。で、ダメージバフがかなり入ってるような感じがしますが、
and before it was that it slowed enemies that got hit. And you know, we found really that adding a slowed enemies isn't really quite the powerful effect that we want. So instead of doing a slow, now it's going to give you a whole bunch of multiplicative bonus damage to anything that you grab. So again, just straight up a lot more powerful than it was before.
パワークリープにならないかな、大丈夫かな。
So this one is called Flicker Step. This one basically, when you evade your enemies, you're going to reduce your ultimate cooldown by a pretty chunky amount. So you can see here, as the player is evading through enemies, their ultimate cooldown is getting a lot shorter. So you can, you know, try and create an ultimate build where you're just focused on using your ultimate a bunch of times. The next one is Scoundrel's Leathers. This is our new rogue unique. This one says that when you have inner sight active and you have that unlimited energy, then on cast, when you cast a core skill, you have a chance to spawn a random trap. And this random trap can also be death trap, so it's pretty cool. And last but not least, this is one of my favorite ones, is Dolmen Stone. This is for the druid. And it says that when you cast Hurricane and then you cast Boulder while your Hurricane is active.
ナヤさん、まず燃えそうではあるとのことですけれども、ちょっともう少し様子を見てみましょうか。
Alright, next we're going to be talking about class improvement. So this is the next part of our strategy, which is really looking at the issues that the community's been talking about with every class. And
クラスごとの、バランス変更というより改善ですかね。
Oh, yeah,
バラン
yeah.
ス変更というより
Last
改
week
善
we
で
had
す
talked
ね。
about item level being
タイ
920.
トル的に。
But then there's some of the uniques that we showed earlier, for instance, actually ended up showcasing there's 925 or other numbers beyond. So
Yeah, I wanted to be clear. Yeah, 925 is going to be the new maximum range that you can get for your gear. So 925 is the max high power you can get.
yeah, so it's
アイテムパワーの最高が、
last week where we said 920, but it's
アイテム
actually
パワーの最高
925.
が多分600とか800とか表示されてたアイテムパワーのことで、なんかアダム・フレッチャーが言ってるんでしょうけど、
So as you know,
キャップは925だよ。
oh, it's good. Oh, I don't. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, so here we're just going to give you a preview here, so you can now target farm uniques. And to be clear here, with these new bosses that we're adding in the Season of Blood, these are the uniques that the boss will be able to drop. Now, you can still get uniques from all content in the game. It's just a rare chance to get any of them, but you have a much higher chance to get these specific bosses.
ターゲットファームできるようになる、各ボスの、で、ターゲットファームできるユニークの、種類ですね。例えばバーシャンであれば、で今度はロードズヤですね。ゼール教、はい、が落とす、ユニークアイテム。が落とす、ユニークアイテムのリスト
I know
で
we've
す
gotten a lot
ね。
of questions about like, hey, you talked about target farming. Like, well, can I actually target farm off of these new bosses? And so we wanted to make sure that we actually showcase that list here. So
ビーストーンアイスが落とす、ユニークアイテム。 が落とす、ザック・マイルドさん、狙えるのはいいねとのことですけども、そうですね、ターゲットファーミングできるようになるのは、すごくいい変更だと思います。一つモチベーションになりますよね。ゆっくりしていってください。ゆっくりしていってください。 で、デュリエルですね。デュリエルでターゲットファーミングできるもの。で、ここに、例えば、ハーレクリーンクレスト、まあ、通称シャコですね。とか、アンディ、アンダリエル・ギサージュ、とか、なんかも入ってる。あとは、ドゥームブリンガー、グランドファーザーという、トップティア、ユーバーユニークですね。長級ユニークなんかが入っている。
Alright, so now let's get to the class improvements. So yeah, our strategy here was
なるほど。
each class that the community is talking about. These changes are mostly unique to each class and they're meant to target specific
今の先に持ってきてから、じゃあ、クラスごとの改善に移りましょうかということですね。はい、トム・ハイドさん、ハーレクイーン、そうです。ハーレクイーンクレストを、デュリエルで、ターゲットファーミングですね。狙い撃ちすることができる。ザック・マイルドさん、相当確率はあれだろうけれどもということですけれども、はい、それでも、一般的なヘルタイドのチェストとか、ナイトメアダンジョンでの狩りとか、そういうのに比べると、だいぶ、落とす確率が高くなるようです。どこまで高くなるのかはちょっと蓋を開けてみないとわからないですけどね。蓋を開けてみないとわからないですけどね。
Now gets 677, so almost double amount. If you are building a lot of maximum life, like this character is, you're just going to see a lot more fortify values, which means it's a lot easier for your character to get into that
あれ、フォーティファイって何だったかな。あれ、フォーティファイって何だったかな。
Alright, next we're going to talk about some class adjustments here. So, during our Season of the Malignant live stream, if you remember, we talked about how sometimes we're going to need to make adjustments to things that are over.
クラスのバランス、クラスごとのバランス変更ですね。
For a little bit that you have your perfect right where your power level of everything in the game.
トモハイドさんありがとうございます。強化ですね。はい。
Firstly, we live in the real world, so no game's really exactly like this. It's more like something like this, right? Where you have a range where, your lowest power thing and your highest power thing are within here.
おっさんさん、今ユニーク、ドロ時の、ドロップ時の、800万分の1だとか言われたのが1万分の1くらいになるんでしょうかね。ちょっとそのあたり、数値までは今のところ明らかになってないので分かんないですけど、それだと、800倍とかですか？ドロップ率の上昇。
or something that's bugged or working unintended, it can get out of the range. And so we're committed now that when things get out of range too far, we're going to bring it back to that normal realm where everything is. So in the Season of Blood, we're really looking at three situations here where this happens. Sometimes builds and playstyles can just dramatically be outperforming others. Another one is fixing unintended interactions that result in extreme outliers. These are usually like bugs or other things like that. And then designs, and this is kind of future-proofing, but we're looking at designs that have the potential for infinite power scaling. So that going forward, particularly when we're adding leaderboards into the game, we really want to make sure that the power levels of
一応、天井知らずに、パワースケーリング、パワークリープを起こすような、潜在的な要素がある場合には、修正する気はあるみたいですね。
So the first one is Necromancer. If you've played a Bone Spear Necro, you probably saw this coming a little bit. But Ossified Essence, your key passive, we're reducing your damage bonus from 1 to 0.5%. And to be clear here, even after this change, this key passive is still probably a contender for being the strongest one in the game. It's really, really powerful. It adds a ton of damage. And really what this lets us do actually, and you'll see when you get to look at our patch notes, it gives us some room to add power in other places in Bone Necro, rather than it all being centralized only around the key passive. We're also reducing the Bone Graph Legendary Paragon node max essence per stack a little bit. You're still going to be able to get a ton of maximum essence in the game, but we're just bringing these down a little bit. And then the next two, these are going to be kind of themed. We've got the Barbarian, the Supreme Wrath of the Berserker. This is the one where while your Wrath of the Berserker is active, when you spend Fury, you get a damage bonus on Berserking multiplicatively, and this could scale infinitely, and now we're just adding a cap to it. And then the next one, similarly, that's the Rampaging Werebeast. The crit strike damage bonus is now going to be capped at 200%. And again, these numbers are still really high at 100 and 200% multiplicative bonus damage.
若干大きい気味なそのスキルに対して上限を設ける、キャップを設けるっていう、そういう話ですね。ダメージボーナス、ラスト・オブ・ザ・バザーカー、3からあるおなじみのスキルですけれども、だと 100%。パラゴンボードで、ちょっと弱いなっていうようなものについて強化したというようなものについて、デシメーターなんだろう、
And then when you overpower vulnerable enemies, you double that and you get a 20% multiplicative damage bonus. So it's much more powerful than it was before and is on par with other similar effects. Next one now is Berserking. Berserking Barbarians are going to be eating pretty happy this patch. The damage bonus used to be additive, so when you went to the Berserking state and you got that damage bonus, it was only additive with your other damage bonuses, and now it's going to be multiplicative. So you're just being in Berserking in general is going to be much more lucrative for you. And next, the of Ancestral Force Legendary.
加算で計算されていたバザーク、バーサクかな、をちょっと日本語のスキルがすぐにパッと出てこなくて申し訳ありません。はい。それが乗算に計算され直されると、乗算で勘定するように変えたと。乗算で勘定するように。
So Incinerate is getting a pretty big buff here. The ramp up time, so for those of you who don't play,
ただその加算を乗算に変えるっていうことはその分ダメージの数字が上がるわけで、変えるっていうことはその分ダメージの数字が上がるわけで、結局ダメージの桁数がこれでまた大きくなるんじゃないかなという懸念は発症ありますね。大きくなるんじゃないかなという懸念。他のクラスもそれに合わせてその調整が来るでしょうから。エンハンスト、フローズンオーブ強化とかですかね。なお、フローズンオーブ強化とかですかね。ザック・マイルドさん、乗算にして上限設けたってことかな。うん、大体そんな感じかもしれないですね。もしれないですね。乗算にできるものは乗算にして、で、パワークリープが起きそうなものに関しては上限を設けた。パワークリープが起きそうなものに関しては上限を設けた。
The one area that we saw was with basic skills. Pretty much every rogue build was running Puncture. Now, Puncture is a great skill. It does a whole lot of really cool things.
ローグに関しては程よい感じになってるなってるとなっているので、そんなに大きなアップデートはないと。
Bringing those up to 50% chance to kind of keep them on par with the other basics. And then Enhanced Blade Shift, the upgrade to Blade Shift, will now immediately give you the full movement speed bonus. Prior, you had to move through enemies, and it took a little bit of time to ramp up. We're just going to give you that full movement speed bonus right off the bat. And then Heartseeker, the
どちらかというと使われてないスキル
it previously stacked up at
に若干のバフ、若干でもないか、結構大きいか、バフを
So now we're going to increase the gain per stack up
つ
to
けてる感じですね。
5% per stack.
は
You
い。
get that full
ロ
bonus
グに
within
関しては
3 weeks.
そんな印象かな。
Conveniently, the same number that you need to
フォー
max
ス
out
フルアロ
your combo
ー
bonus.
が、
More play in combo point builds.
今のシーズン、評価上げてるので、
Impetus passive.
もう少し、もう一押ししたいといったようなところですかね。
And more importantly, it also increases the damage.
トモハイドさん、馬場のレジェンダリーノード、現状ほぼ壊滅的で使えないので、これがどう出るかということですね。馬場の一番最後に出てきたやつですね。
Damage. Now you're definitely going to be getting this full bonus on a higher damage skill, like a core skill, whenever you get to trigger the impetus passive. Talk about Druid.
Yeah, so
ド
similar
ルイ
to
ド
the Rogue, the Druid's in a pretty good place. So
ドルイド
not
は
quite as many updates to classes,
ローグと一緒で、割といい位置にいると思うので、他のクラスと比べるとそんなに大きなアップデートはしてませんよということですね。
And then enhanced Ravens, the bonus critical
レイ
strike
ブン
chance
の
you get is 5%, so across the board, just a much better skill.
レイブン
And then
の
Rabies. Rabies is also
レイ
getting
ブ
a
ン、
pretty
レイ
big
ビー、レイ
damage
ビー
buff.
は、
And then
なん
we're
だろう。
also making one of the upgrades, which is natural rabies.
超
Make it that your rabies spread twice as fast.
レイビーとそのままやるか、狂犬病とかでもやるか、ちょっとスキル名今出てこないですけれども。
And then the natural rabies will increase that.
ずっと英語版でプレイしてたので、なかなかちょっと日本語版がすぐパッと、日本語名がパッと出てこないという。
And now Necromancer plays. So Necromancer
ディアブロ3も長らく英語版でプレイしてたので、
all of it.
なおのこと日本語が出てこないんですよね。
Lots of them. First thing is Death's Defense. This is a passive that was kind of mandatory for minion builds. This was really our fail-safe that, you know, a boss or other big
はい、
enemies would just
ミニオン、まあ、ネクロマンサーの手下ですね。手下に、いくらかバフを加えたと。で、リソース回復に関しては先ほど、いくらかキャップを設けて、
That's just how our pets now work.
S、
We've redesigned
ネクロマンサー、
Passive to give you another alternative
なん
for
だった
even
かな
more defense.
のリソースを、
even better today,
Yes.
too, yeah. Next, Golem,
ま
basic attack
あ、
damage is getting doubled. We're insane.
無限同然に回復するみたいなことはできなくした
Iron
と。
Golem's active damage is also going up. The Blood Golem by 55%. The Iron Golem Slam is going to be 15% better. Also, many of your minion Paragon node damage values have been increased. So that scaling minion damage into the mid and late game is also going to be a lot better. Cold Bringer's aspect. This one used to say that, you know,
ゴーレムの基本アタック、の、ダメージが 100%、強化されたりとか、ブラッドゴーレム、アイアンゴーレムのアクティブダメージがそれぞれ 55%、15% 強化されたとか、
And now we're basically just cleaning that up. So now instead of having 3 separate affixes, we now have one unified your minions inherit thorns affix, and that can appear on ranged shields and gloves. So now you're going to have a little bit less spam of affixes that you're not interested in if you're not looking for thorns. And last but not least, shields. This just makes sense. Shields have armor on them. So now when you have a shield as a necro, it has armor.
ネクロマンサーが装備する盾が、アーマー、防御力ですね、を持つようになると。
ザッ
クマリルドさん、ネクロのミニオンは、ベータの時の修正入る前の硬さでいいのになと。まあ、最初に公開された時のバランスですよね。割と悪くなかったと私も思います。
はい、
ダメージバケツですね。
vulnerable, and then crit them. That's how you did most damage in Season of Malignant, no matter what your build, no matter what your class. And so that meant that, say,
クラスに関わらず、ビルドに関わらず、クリットダメージと、脆弱ダメージを持って、ダメージをスケールさせると。
leading to a lot of stagnation, a lot of builds that could not fully utilize critical strike or vulnerable, say builds like dot builds, because dots can't crit.
ただし、ドットビルド、継続ダメージビルドですね、ドクとか、はい、そういうのを除いて、ダメージビルドですね、ドクとか。
Critical strike damage, vulnerable, and overpower as well are going to be different buckets, but mixing them will only give multiplicative damage bonuses capped at a certain amount. So if an enemy is vulnerable, you're going to deal 20% more damage to them. And it doesn't matter how much additional plus vulnerable damage you get, it's not going to increase the 20% multiplicative amount. Same with critical strike.
これも天井を作った形ですね。脆弱ダメージは、最大 20% まで、の乗算ダメージ。クリティカルダメージは最大 50% で、オーバーパワーも、最大 50% という天井を作ったというような感じですね。で、これがそれぞれ別のバケツになるというのは、まあ、で、これがそれぞれ別のバケツになるというのは、
was definitely not overpowered in Season of the Malignant.
オーバーパワーは、全然オーバーパワーじゃなかったと言ってますね。
Werebear druids to be very well in this season. So let's go over an actual example here with numbers just to clarify what I mean. So if you have 150% critical strike damage, that's what it shows on your character sheet, right? That's how much critical strike damage you have.
ドルイドのエンハンストレイブンスはカラスの群れの強化ですかね。カラスの群れですね。はい。大さんさんのおっしゃる通りです。で、大さんさんローパワー。大さんさんのおっしゃる通りです。ザック・マイルドさん、なんか上限作ってフィードバックで解放していく感じなのかな。その気配が多少しますね。
Whatever damage you would deal, and we're going to multiply it by 1.5.
トモハイドさん、オーバーパワーの正直な告白は草ですと。
And that's why the 50% and the 20% combine to 80. It doesn't combine to 70 because you're multiplying them together. Like I said, so you still get some synergy where it's greater than the sum of its parts, but no longer is it the full 150 and the full 200. We're just always going to take the 50 and the 20. And so that should give us a bit more, scaling will be a bit more consistent across crit and vulnerable, and you're not going to be incentivized to every build has to stack critical strike damage and has to stack vulnerable. It'll still be valuable to do it for builds that are interested in that, but it's not going to be the best in slot for every single build every time.
One of the things we wanted to do here was still motivate you, and you should be glad to be mixing multiplicative buckets. It's still an interesting thing to do. Just your opportunity cost isn't insane if you don't. So now you can do other things.
Yeah, so the overall impact that players are going to feel in Season of Blood with this is that the nominal damage numbers that you're doing are going to go down slightly. And that's because you just don't have this massive multiplicative bonuses. But we're not here trying to make the player weaker against monsters. What we actually did was we went through and looked at all the monsters in the game and retuned them to make sure that players who are optimizing their build and have strong builds are still approximately as equal against monsters as they were before. Mixing damage types, as you said, was going to be less required. It's still powerful to do, but it's not going to be the end all be all.
複数のダメージソースを混ぜることに関しては今までほど重要性は高くなくなってるはずだと。ただまあもちろん積むことでダメージは上がるけれどもそこまで効率は今までほど効率は良くないはずだと。Individual damage types are more equal in that.
And then what we're going to do after that is balance monster power around this. So you know, again, our goal is not to make you weaker. It's to make everything have more parity, and we're going to balance the whole game around this new world that we live in the Season of Blood.
Yeah, it's not about bringing crit and vuln down. It's about making sure other builds can reach that same level of power that crit and vuln builds experienced in Season of Malignant. It'll just open up the space for more builds to reach that type of power level with a variety of skills and affixes and not just reach that type of power level.
他のビルドも、クリティカル、脆弱ダメージを、積んでいくタイプのビルドと、バランスを取っていくっていうのが、この変更の目的だと、ダメージバケツの、最終的な変更の目標だと。
And then once you invest in that as like the main bulk of your power, you can find other ways of increasing that. Maybe you do find a way to apply vulnerable, but it's not going to be the main focus of your build. You can also get a lot of skill ranks to increase whatever your core skill rank is. Those still increase your core skill damage multiplicatively with skill ranks, which goes back to what Adam had said earlier about how powerful skill ranks are going to be going forward into Season of Blood. Also, we don't want this to just make the game simpler. We know that right now players they feel like, you know, they're getting crit and vulnerable on their gear, and that's great. That adds an interesting layer of the item chase, like, hey, you found the best in slot item. And with this change, it's not going to be that exact same, but our intention is not to make the itemization game simpler or more boring, because we're actually making a bunch of other changes to make this a bonus, to find other ways of scaling your character in interesting ways that Adam's going to talk about here.
So, last but not least, we're going to talk about making it a bonus, and I'm going to kind of expose a gap in our armor here. What we were really afraid of when we were looking at doing these changes is that in a vacuum, if we did this and nothing else, we think that it could be a negative experience to the game, kind of what Charles alluded to. What I'm terrified of is that we do these changes and the reaction basically is, wait, you're lowering my damage and you're making it less rewarding to try and build crit and vuln. This is awful. I hate it, right? This isn't our goal, and we knew that we had to combine this with some other systemic updates to the game to make sure that this new world of itemization, damage buckets, was something that's interesting.
ダメージを低くして、
And also, what we mentioned before is that we are again going to be tuning monsters to be more appropriate with the new player power level. Our goal here is that your player power difference should be minimal. If anything, you'll probably feel more
そのステータスを積んでも、その効果を低めてるだけだろう。特にそのクリティカル脆弱ダメージを低めてるだけだろうとか、そういう批判が来るんじゃないかということで、それで来るんじゃないかと。
How are we bringing these things together? Well, we're going to bring that player power up for the other builds through these kind of designs and effects. So the goals with these changes before we get into them are twofold. The first is we want to add some multiplicative power back to the player, but in a more interesting way. Because as we mentioned before, we are removing multiplicative power by capping it with crit and vuln. So we want it now, like the upside of that is that we can actually give it back, but we can do it now in choices that you make as a player rather than it just being an underhood thing about how the game works. And then we also want to try and make the itemization experience better, particularly in the latter portions of the game. We want the stats you chase on your items to kind of be more tailored to your build and be a little bit more interesting. This isn't the end-all be-all of our plans for itemization, but this is just one way that we think we can try and make your stats and your gear and how they mix with your build a little bit more interesting. So now let's go through an example. So this is these kinds of effects are what we added kind of all over the place on all the classes of ways to give you multiplicative power. So on the left here is the old elemental summoner Paragon legendary node on the sorcerer. And before it basically said, you know, we want you to put all the conjuration skills on your bar. And when you do, they have reduced cooldown and mana
まあ
cost
骨メイジですかね。はい、俗称ですいません。骨メイジですか
Now you're
ね。
still going to get that.
左が右のようになる
So
と。
they still get reduced cooldown and mana cost, but now we've given you a
で、
gold to
ブラケット X って入っているように、乗算、それまで加算だったダメージ計算を乗算にするようにしたと。 あと、マナコストか。マナコストと、で、あと、 そのダメージの量を、乗算にしたと。より乗算でスケーリングする場所を、まあ、増やしたっていうことですね。
And the other really neat thing about this is that it makes your Paragon board or Paragon nodes, and even we can make items or other effects more interesting where we say, hey, you know, you get bonus non-physical damage. That will actually triple dip with this Paragon node legendary power, because it will increase your damage with fire, lightning, and cold, and so it actually will triple the amount that this one node would give you in value for this one legendary power. And we've added these effects kind of all over the place. You're going to see a lot more scaling. You're going to care about different stats that you didn't care about before, because now they can be multiplied depending on what you get.
今まで気にも留めていなかったスキルが、乗算ダメージに変更したことで、劇的なそういう効果が得られるケースが、そういうケースを結構増やしたと。
More damage based on that stat, and when you cast your ultimate, that multiplicative damage will apply to all of your skills for 8 seconds. So this kind of enables a complete new build with the rogue, where you want to spam, you know, rain of arrows or whatever ultimate you can as often as you can, because even just using the ultimate is going to give you a multiplicative bonus, and that bonus on all of your skills will be based on this damage with ultimate
ちょっ
stat that you
とこれ蓋開けてみないとわかんないかな。
Rogue is my favorite class to play that new flicker step unique on, where
Yes.
when you're evading through enemies, you
結
get a lot
構
of
変更
multiple
点
interactions,
多そうですね。
no witnesses more often.
この後パッチノートが公開されるなんていう話もありますけれども、どれくらいの量になってるかちょっと強々としますね。ザック・マイルドさん、これやってみないとですねということで、はい、こんな雰囲気ですね。
Some amount of this, and it's not only on the Paragon board, some of it your key passives will be doing it, some uniques will be doing this.
まあ多少これによって検証を漏れしてとんでもないダメージ出しちゃうやつとか出てくるでしょうけどおそらく出ると思うんですけれども、まあその都度修正するといったような感じですかね。修正前提ということであれば、まあ最初いろいろ壊れてる可能性は、壊れてる事例が出てくる可能性はある程度考慮しなくちゃいけないかななんていうふうには思いますね。だからこれで全部治るのではなくってこの後問題を実際にパッチを当ててみてで少なくともシーズン3までには安定させるようにしたいとそういうことですかね。シーズン3だとリーダーボード入ってきますからシーズン3だとリーダーボード入ってきますからスタート時点でなんか特定のクラスだけぶっ壊れてたとかっていうのはあまり歓迎したくないでしょうしあまりザック・マイルドさんが知勢が検証してくれるでしょうということでそうですね。数学得意なプレイヤー結構洋の東西問わずいるのでおっさんさん、これだけいじると上限設定抜けと想定外の組み合わせはちょこちょこ出てきそうですねということで、はい、私もちょっとそれに関して同感ですね。
stuff to actually cover regarding class changes, of course.
それに関して同感ですね。
one thing to note is I know we only highlighted
まあそれを一つ一つ潰していくことがおそらく前提なんじゃないかなとは思うんですけど、
you'll be able to read through every single class change, all the different changes that you talked about last week on the stream and other items including
ヤマピーさん PTR やりなさいよっていう感想
It's a pretty lengthy patch note.
コメントありがとうございます。
Or this one, yeah, for sure.
はい、私も右に同じです。はい。はい、PTR やれば解決でね的なところはありますよね。解決でね的なところはありますよね。コモハイドさん、乗算項目増やすと D3 大変そう。あ、D3 みたいな感じで大変そうということですね。ただまあ、天井を設けてるということで、天井なし、天井知らずの、パワークリープっていうのは、避けたいんだっていう意思表示は、意思表明は感じました。意思表示は、で、次がパッチ 1.2.1 に関する変更点ですね。
One big thing that we are adding in 121 is a training dummy, kind of a target dummy where you can actually
ダミー、練習用のダミー人形があるんですね。
in Kyobushad in a cellar, and you can actually customize it and change it from like a normal training dummy to, you know, adding additional ones or boss ones, and you'll actually be able to test out different builds. So this will be
ビルドテストをするのに、使ってくれということみたいです。実際にダメージを与えてみて、そのダメージがどう変わるかと。ザック・マイルドさん DPS メーター来たのかと。まあ、そういうことでしょう。はい。コモハイドさん、ありそうでなかった人形。そうですね。コモハイドさん、ありそうでなかった人形。おっさん、かかし実装は個人的に欲しかったので、かなり嬉しいと。はい、私も悪くない追加実装だと思います。で、これ多分フィードバックを得ることで開発者チームにも開発チームにもプラスになると思いますし、かかしというかそのダミー人形自体に自体を監視するようなパラメータ仕込んどけば、いろいろデータも取れるでしょうから。いろいろデータも取れるでしょうから。かかし1体だけだったら、1体もしくは数体だけだったら、そんなにクライアントやサーバーも重くなったりしないでしょうし、ね。クライアントやサーバーも重くなったりしないでしょうし。はい、Q&A ですね。トモハイドさん、どうしてユーザーの話はめちゃくちゃ聞くのに PTR しないのだろう。PTR をしないからめちゃくちゃ聞くんじゃないですかね。PTR をしないからめちゃくちゃ聞くんじゃないですかね。まあというか PTR 用のサーバーを準備するゆとりが今ないのかもしれないですね。
Yeah, there are definitely skills that are underperforming that don't have as wide of a use as we want. I would say we're going to try and look at them at an individual basis, on a skill by skill. There are definitely ones that we've identified as
トモハイドさん、そうだったのか。 いや、わかりませんけど。
launch the game to millions of people, right? Of course, we have ideas that sometimes pan out, sometimes they don't. And when they don't, we have to kind of reevaluate. Well, what was the purpose of it? Can we still
でも
keep the heart and
TTR っ
spirit
て
of the
結構
skill?
裏でいろいろ仕掛けが必要になりますから、実は実装は本番と微妙に違ったりしますし、あちこち。
So it kind of depends what our answer is on a skill by skill basis, but it is definitely a goal of ours that we don't want to skill
例え
to just
ば
languish forever and not
コスメは購入できないようにしないといけないとか、コスメは購入できないようにし
we're
ない
not
とい
saying
けな
every
い
skill
と
needs to
か、
be used equally by every player.
割と本番と違う実装にしなくちゃいけないので、準備に結構手間がかかると思う。
Feeling smart that you're able to find this niche use case or you're playing in a unique way that not many other people do. But if a skill isn't fulfilling even any purpose or the purpose it was intended for, then I think that's grounds to reevaluate.
使えないスキルについて、それをどうするか、使えないスキルの今後についてどういうプランを持っていますかと、どういう計画でいますかと。そうですね。
And if you look at just pure damage, puncture compared to the other basics on Rogue, about comparable. Like it wasn't an outlier in one way or another. But we saw so many players playing puncture because of its interaction with other systems, right? We had it, hey, puncture is a really easy way of applying vulnerable, and in Season of Malignant, vulnerable was really valuable. So we're not only tackling this on making the other options more usable and interact in an easier to use way.
なんだったかな、が脆弱ビルドには都合が良かったと。でも今はもう脆弱ダメージにこだわる必要がなくなったのでっていうことで、はい。
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Is that we talk a lot about base systems of the game in the Season of Blood, and a reason why we're really looking at all these base systems.
パンクチャーってあれですね、ダガーを投げるやつですね。
So that we can identify these outlying skills or effects, and now we can fix them in a way that's more healthy for the overall game. Because when the overall systems are healthy, then we can go back and look at the outliers and fix them in a good way. Like we could have fixed Puncture by just taking away the vulnerable application, right? But really the problem is vulnerable, not puncture.
問題があるのはパンクチャーの方ではなくって脆弱ダメージの方だと。だから脆弱ダメージの方を修正することで対処しよう。だから脆弱ダメージの方を修正することで
Diablo IV works is that channeling skills do not overpower. That's partially because it would just, if you overpower is determined on a skill cast basis. So when you cast a skill, the game determines, hey, did you overpower or did you not? And if you overpower with a channel skill, then channel skills can in theory go on forever. And that would just be a situation we don't want to live in, where you're just fishing for procs basically of overpower, and then as soon as you get it, you let it go forever. That's not really the kind of gameplay we want to encourage in Diablo IV. And so it's true that, yes, channeled skills do not overpower. But we're still looking, when we're looking to balance channeled skills, such as Incinerate, we know that going in.
Yeah, they should be balanced and tuned around the fact that they can't overpower. And actually, to allude to that, because that's a good segue. If you remember back, I talked about the Barbarian and the Druid, how we're capping that unlimited cap of power that you can get. That's kind of also why overpower doesn't work on channeled skills, is that if we made it work, we would have to tune and balance all of overpower around the potential infinite duration that a channeled skill has. And that means that now overpower only gets used for channeled skills, because that's the only place that it's going to be good, and then everything else doesn't feel as good because of it. That's why we're adding these caps and things to some places, is that it's not really because we don't like people to get a lot of power, it's that everything else must become weak for one thing to be even reasonable, let alone strong, if we allow infinite scaling of things. And that makes, while that one thing might be really cool, it makes the overall game much less fun or interesting.
I'm gonna
キャップを設ける、天井を設けるっていうのは、
a lot of questions here.
パワースケーリングじゃない、パワークリープに対する対処であって、これは ゲームをプレイヤーをまあ虐げるような意図でやってるわけじゃないんだと。まあ虐げるような意図でやってるわけじゃないんだと。
Nothing to announce today, but it is something that I know the team is very much reading and seeing. Does this mean that Tempest Roar only drops from Duriel, or can it drop from other rare mobs? No, it can drop from other rare mobs. Duriel just happens to have we were showcasing the specific drop tables for uniques for these bosses here. So you'll know, like, hey, if I want to get a Tempest Roar on a Druid or something, I can actually farm Duriel and have a better chance of knowing that.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, you can still get them in the other parts of the game. When you finish Nightmare Dungeon or go through it, they can still drop off of mobs, be it end of Nightmare Dungeon rewards, you still get them have Hell Tide, all those things. Just doing this, you have a higher chance to get these specific things.
Let's see, we have a question from Sock and Boppers. Will we be seeing more support or basic focus builds this time around? I don't know
basic skills?
I guess so.
Yeah, basic builds.
Yeah,
basic skill builds. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not as much support for like
基本スキルをベースにしたビルドやサポートビルドが増える余地はありますかということですね。
making your basic skill kind of flipping it on its head, right? Basic skills right now are a bit more of a setup, a bit more of a generator type of skill. That's definitely a design space that we are looking into and will be making designs for in the future.
検討中です的な。はい。まあ、今の時点ではそんなところなんでしょうね。今の時点ではそんなところなんでしょうね。
How are the Necromancer and Sorceress classes being balanced to account for the changes to resistances which intelligence characters inherently benefit from?
Sure. I can take this one. So, one thing to keep in mind is when you're making a fantasy ARPG or a fantasy-based game, we do actively want there to be some differences between the classes where some are better or worse at some things than others, right? We want them to have boons for picking your class so that they're, you feel different than all the other ones, right? If everyone was just like a blank class, that would be a very different game than what we made for Diablo. So that was partially why when we talked about resistances, we talked a lot about how our goals are that everyone can kind of comfortably get there. Because what we didn't want was if resistances really matter and you can't get to cap, or you can only get to cap at like level 100 with maxed out gear, and even then you may not be able to, and you have to like do this really complicated puzzle, then those classes would have a really large advantage over the other ones in the elemental resistance realm, right? And a lot of our bosses and things do damage, so it would actually be a really big issue.
ビルドを変えるその属性耐性、とかでその敵に応じてビルドを変えるのだとすれば、ビルドを変えるためのコストですよね。パラゴンとかパラゴンノードとか、スキルとか、に関するその、リセットコストはもうちょっとなんとかしてほしいかななんてちょっと今聞いてて思いました。で、ザック・マイルドさん、スカスカのスキルツリーは埋めてほしいと。スキルツリーに余白が割と多いのは、もしかしたら拡張版とかで、追加のスキルがついたりするのかなとか、そういう計画なのかなとちょっと思ったりはしてます。実際どうなのかは分かりませんけれども、そうですね、機会があったら、キャンプファイヤーチャットで質問投げてみたい項目の一つかもしれないですね。キャンプファイヤーチャットよりブリズコンの方がいいのかな。ただ、まあ、私はブリズコンのチケットは持ってないので、今年は無理ですけれども。はい。で、トモハイドさん、フレババ勢が固唾を飲んで見守っています。少数派と思いますけれども。でも、はい。フレババか。そっか、ベーシックスキルね。はい。
we don't expect there to be a huge power discrepancy, especially since everyone's going to get to that cap eventually.
はい。
We have a question from Psychophant, which is a good question. It's for Barbarian specifically.
Sure.
What are your plans to address Barbarian resource generation and uncoupling it from shouts?
ちょっと最後聞き取れなかったけれども、ババの、リソースジェネレーションについてどう考え、リソースジェネレーションについての質問ですね。はい。
We're still looking at what we want our solutions to be. We're also looking at similar thing with sorcerers with the defensive skills, where they want to take like Frost Nova and Flame Shield and Teleport and do all of them. It's a deeper issue to solve that I think requires us to really look at why people are picking them and to make sure that they're still okay picking some, just not picking all of them all the time. We don't have anything to announce yet, but it is something that we are aware of. But it's a little bit more complicated, I think. One of the things, I'll just be transparent about how, at least for shouts, we're thinking is one of the issues that made it hard was that we designed a lot of our passives and our legendary effects and other things that said, when you shout, gain X. And so right away, that becomes triple more powerful when you put on 3 shouts instead of 1. And we didn't balance it that way, where we expected everyone to just always take the 3 things. Same with defensive skills or anything else that's synergistic like that. On the one hand, we like these kinds of designs, like, hey, your core skills do more damage, or your other things, of a category do more to make you think about mixing the category. But when we go too far, and we definitely, I think, did with shouts as an example, then it just says, hey, do all of them or don't do any of them. And the answer right now is really do all of them, because they're all really strong independently. So we may need to decouple them, which is like, hey, instead of all your shouts get increased duration, or you always heal when your shouts are active, it'll be when specific shouts are. But then, that doesn't feel good. It's kind of limiting because we're kind of telling you what to do. So we have to try and walk that balance really well, which is a difficult tightrope to walk.
A question in here regarding glyphs from Max78. Sorry, I don't want to butcher the name. Any plans on making more glyphs or bonuses spell activate?
Yes, so as we're making more content going forward in future seasons, we're going to be making a lot more glyphs. And that is definitely design space, is to work on categories of skills or either other unique effects. It's not always going to be, and honestly, we showcased 3 glyphs here on the stream, and we're adding in 10 new glyphs in Season of Blood.
次のシーズンに、今回は、3つ、紹介したけれども、シーズン2では、全部で11のグリフを、新たに実装することになっていると。グリフに関する質問ですかね。ちょっと聞き逃してしまいましたけれども。グリフに関する質問ですかね。ちょっと聞き逃してしまいましたけれども。
Yeah. That's actually a really good question, because I know when you hear oh, reduction to CC, it's like, oh, now I'm going to CC enemies way less. It's like, no, just on the player itself, because we have heard a lot of feedback from players about, sometimes you just get, especially in higher level dungeons, you just get completely stuck. And all the CC changes are actually noted in the patch notes, so you'll be able to read more about that. Question from Darth Microtransaction, DM. Know who DM is? He's a Diablo partner that we have. How many total new legendaries and new unique items are coming in Season 2? Any new Uber uniques? Yes, there are all 3 of those that are being added. New legendaries, new uniques, not Uber uniques. Yes, sorry. That is all in the patch notes.
パッチノートに、新しいユニークとか新しいレジェンダリーノートですね、決心なんかは、すべて載ってるので、そっちを参照してほしいということですね。で、そのパッチノートはおそらくこの配信の後に、公開されるということなんでしょう。
All right, we're going to take one more question here. This is from Propier. With the changes to damage buckets, it'll be much harder to just stack very high damage to overcome some of the hardest content like Uber. Do you plan to make adjustments to bosses to account for lower damage ceiling?
Oh, how far do I want to go into this answer? We've had a lot of conversations about this. Yeah, I'll give. All right. So, yes, we did look at monster power and boss power, and specifically Uber Lilith as well. So why don't we talk about Uber Lilith tuning? Because we did actually tune her a little bit specially in the Season of Blood and going forward. So our idea with tuning Uber Lilith and this aspirational, very difficult content, right? Kind of a little history lesson, right? When the game came out, Uber Lilith obviously was very, very hard. Right, like I say, her power level's up here, right? Everything else, like comparably, is somewhere around here. She's ridiculously crazy hard.
ウーバーリリスの強さですね。
builds that had either like really, really strong interactions, like Bone Spear Necro, where it was just like really, really overtuned, or ones that were bugged, right? Where they just got like 100x more power than other things, and it wasn't really intended. We don't really want our aspirational content to live in that space where like only oversights can really beat it comfortably. Our goal for it was always that most builds would be able to beat it, and it was kind of an achievable goal, but it was hard. And obviously having that balance in a multiplicative scaling game is really hard, it turns out. In Season of Blood, one thing that is really nice and is an advantage to all of these overhauls that we're doing to our math and the power level of the classes is that before, like we talked about, the difference of multiplicative power of the Crit Voln and everyone else was Crit Voln was way up here and could compete with her. Everything else couldn't really. So you kind of were forced into these builds to have a fair chance at the fight, which isn't really the world that we want to live in. Now that we've kind of, stabilized the ground of all the builds, they can't, in theory, I'm hoping, can't get as crazy of a difference in power level between each other. That means that now we can more finely tune things like Uber Lilith, like any other endgame content that we make, that they can be more stable as far as who can beat them. So we took a look at Uber Lilith, and you'll see that we've tested her internally with builds that aren't those ones that we know are crazy, and tuned her to a degree where we believe these average builds will be able to defeat her. Obviously, there will be variants. Like I said, the top ones and the bottom ones will be some, but it'll be much more in line with one another. So, we did take a look at that
平
specifically. We
均
do
的
believe
な
that
ビ
just
ルドで
the
倒
foundation of
せ
the
るような
more players and more builds will be able to do that.
強さに、
Our intention is not to just bring everyone down. It's to open up the room for more builds to reach that same level. But more builds take on Uber Lilith and not just have to rely on either crit vulnerable.
より多くのビルドが、ウーバーリリスに、挑戦して、勝てるような、挑戦して、難易度に、
She'll be much more doable.
まあ、チューニング、調整していると。
Yeah, and I think there's also
まあ、チューニング、
you guys had already talked about regarding
調整していると。
that will also
ただ、それでも、あくまでも、高い難易度で、あり続けるっていう、そこは維持したいということのようですね。
go into numbers and math and everything for you guys regarding class changes and all the other damage buckets and resistance changes that are coming to the game.
ザックマイルドさん、グリフは相当できないかな。相当機能欲しいですよね。はい。特に今のところ言及はありませんね。はい。私が聞き逃しているところを除いて、はい。
But that will begin on October 17th. Also, of course, like what we announced last week, Diablo IV is coming to Steam, so you can wishlist that now. So if you prefer to play on Steam, you have that.
Steam 版が、今月の17日に来ますよ。トモハイドさん、よかった。今まさにボコボコにされているので助かる。ウーバーリリス挑戦中なんですね。はい、頑張ってください。ぜひぜひ。
Consoles, you still can, and if you want to carry over your progress from Battle.net or consoles over to
倒してくださいね。
well from there. But October 17th, Season 2, Season of Blood, and at the same time, 121, just a reminder, the target dummy that we talked about and the Reset Paragon board feature will be coming in 121. That will be landing in late October and before BlizzCon. So make sure to tune in for those notes. Do you have anything else I need to say? Oh, BlizzCon. Make sure check us out at BlizzCon. Yeah, BlizzCon's
次はブリズコンだねということで。
And we'll see you guys
次は
in
グリーン
game.
スポーン
Thank you so much. See you in game.
ということで、いやー、聞きながら訳してリアクションしてコメント見てってマルチタスクに向かない人間には結構きついですね。はい。ちょっとこれはもう訓練あるのみですね。もう回数重ねてやっていくしか慣れるしか、改善する方策ないのかもしれないですね。改善する方策ないのかもしれないですね。まあそんなわけでライブ配信を見る回みたいな形になりましたけれども、ザックマイルド同時通訳助かりました。すいません、穴がボコボコ開いてて、はい、ありがとうございます。ご視聴してくださった皆様方、本当に早朝からありがとうございました。ぜひお仕事に支障のないようにお仕事に家事に、はい、学業に、自宅警備に支障のないようになさってください。はい、もし気が向いたらいいねというかチャンネル登録とかいいねとかしていただけると、はい、とても励みになります。はい、それではお疲れ様でした。ザックマイルドさん、ヤマピースさん、オッサンさん、ナイヤさん、お疲れ様でした。ありがとうございました。他の方々もありがとうございました。他の方々もありがとうございました。